We're so honored to be hosting debut writer Kelli Jo Ford, author of Cricket Hallelujah, with my post-its already in it. Kelli Jo Ford is a citizen of the Cherokee Nation of Oklahoma and the recipient of numerous awards, including the Paris Review's Plimpton Prize, which is one of the chapters in this book, the Everett Southwest Literary Award, the Catherine Bakeless Nason Award, Bread Loaf National Arts Fellowship by the Native Arts and Cultures Foundation, and Adobe Paisano Fellowship. Oh my gosh. And more than that, she's a wonderful and charming person. And let me just say, as I might have mentioned in Lake Effect that I was just on, and also in our blog, that I have been so excited about this book since last January, when booksellers met at Winter Institute in Baltimore, which might be the last time I went anywhere with any sense of normalcy. And where we were, I don't know if any of you had this when you go to a conference, we were like each other's North Stars, I don't know. We just kept running into each other everywhere. And it almost became, it was certainly the highlight of the show for me. But after I finished, I thought, well, I have to read this book right now. And the book was as wonderful as the person. So welcome to Kelli Jo Ford. Thank you so much for virtually coming to Milwaukee and Boswell.
Thank you so much, Daniel, for that amazing introduction. And I do want to say, you were my North Star. I was so nervous in Baltimore. I was walking around and like, I'm gonna have to talk about my book for the first time, and what do I say? I don't even know what I wrote. But every time I saw you, it was so fun and warm. And so definitely that was wonderful having you there as sort of my touchstone to keep running into you. And every time I ran into you, it's like, oh, a familiar face, a friendly person, thank you. So yeah.
I usually say to our authors, okay, we're gonna have you do like a little elevator pitch beforehand. And maybe if you want to read a little bit, you can read a couple of pages, something like that. I forgot to say it to you. But my guess is you have enough experience in this world for this book that if I said to you, would you talk a little about your book? You might be able to.
I probably could. Yeah. Should we do that?
I think so. Let's do it.
Sure. So Cricket Hallelujah follows 4 generations really of Cherokee women during it starts in the early 70s, and it follows the youngest 2 generations most closely. That's Renee and Justine over the course of their life, and they leave the Cherokee Nation, Eastern Oklahoma's Indian country, and moved to North Texas, trying to start a new and better life. It happens to be about the time of the oil bust in the mid 80s. So life there isn't exactly, everything that maybe they thought they were running toward. But at its heart, it's a book about mothers and daughters. And place is very important. Like the 2 places, the 2 places of the book, Cherokee Nation and North Texas. And really it's about faith and belief as well. Questions of faith and belief kind of, in some ways, haunt some of the characters over the course of their lives. So, it follows them over decades. Yeah.
Well, there's my next 17 questions. So that's good.
All right.
Do you want to read a little bit now, or maybe we'll save it for a little later? What would you like to do? You're in the mood. You can go either way. This is your store. So this is your show. My store, your show.
I don't know. Let's just talk. I'm having fun talking. But sure, let's read later. And
I just love novels and stories. I love them, and I love them because they have the freedom, a little bit of a freedom that either genre by itself doesn't really have. But right. I would love to know, what was the moment, what was the start point, the origin of this story? Like where were you when you said, I have a story to tell? And what was it?
So, so from the time I first started writing and I took my first intro to creative writing workshop, I was writing people in short stories who came from this fictional town of Bonita. And it's just what came out of me. It's what I could do. And then eventually I started writing stories from the Cherokee Nation, and these are stories that in some ways have very little to do with the book and obviously aren't in here, but it's just what I was compelled to do. And so I just kept writing these stories. Eventually I found my way to grad school and has continued to write these short stories that came from the same places. And eventually they began to come from the same families, and it became clear that I was being compelled to tell a larger story, but I was always committed to the short story as a form. I wanted each chapter to be able to stand alone as its own piece if someone encountered it on its own. So the first, I think the earliest story that's included in the book in terms of when I wrote it takes place in the last third of the book. It's a story called Bonita. It's one of the wildfire stories.
Right.
So that's the earliest story that is in the book. And it just became clear that really, I think in a lot of ways, this is a story about all the women, but I think in a lot of ways it's Justine's story.
Yeah.
And so, I continued writing these stories, but I understood it, I think, once I realized that, I understood that you can't tell Justine's story without telling Renee, her daughter's story. Right. You can't tell Renee's story without telling the great-grandmother's story. So it's just like all their lives were intertwined. And so that became the focus, all these women, particularly Justine and Renee. Yeah, it was a long time. I've been working on this for so long because I didn't know that I was writing a book for a long time. I was wanting to write, the best art story that I could, and then try to write another one. Like I think of it as like chop the wood, carry the water. It's just sort of like, okay, this is what I'm doing now. So I was slow to realize.
I assume I think it can be a bit of a wake-up call, especially if your book does well, because there's going to be so much pressure to write the second book very differently from the first book. Are you feeling that pressure already?
I mean, a little bit, but right now I'm kind of deep in sort of pandemic living, having a 7-year-old at home, and doing my best to promote the book and maintain work, other work as well. So I am when I think about it, but one thing I have an idea for what I want to work on next, and a really rough start, but it's very different because this book, it's sort of so much craft and work and revision went into it, but it was very much like I was compelled to write it, and it felt like I needed to write the book. I needed to write these stories, and I needed to tell these women's stories. And right now I have an idea for a book, and it's like, oh, I've never really sat down with an idea for what I want to write. Like the ideas came later. So I don't know. It's interesting and strange. I've never been here before, but a lot of people write great books from ideas, right? You talk to a lot of writers. That happens.
Yeah. They're definitely in the right direction. Absolutely. I love how your story comes from place, because place is one of the most important things about a book for me. It doesn't have to be mentioned where it is, and sometimes you can figure out where. I just read Brandon Taylor's Real Life, and it was like, I'm reading the book, I'm like, this is Madison. There's no mention of any place in the book. I'm like, I can walk Madison streets and know exactly where this guy is.
Oh, that's lovely. Yeah.
One of the things, your story, there's a lot of going. It's interesting that you're so obsessed with place, because your characters are almost frustrated by place. Mm-hmm. They're like, they leave a lot.
They do.
They go back and forth, and it's interesting that the center of do you feel like the center of your story is actually North Texas, but so much of the book takes place in the Cherokee Nation in Oklahoma, doesn't it? So, but now that I know that the first story was Bonita, mm-hmm. it really changes my perspective. Mm-hmm. I loved the placeness. In fact, I actually read, because I was reading, because so much was in Oklahoma, I actually wound up going back and reading Boomtown, that story about Oklahoma City, afterwards.
Yep. My
Yeah.
husband's he's read that and listened to it 2 or 3 times in the past few months. Anyway.
It's so good.
I haven't read it, but I'm hearing a lot about it, and I hear it when he's in the kitchen doing things. I hear it on the, the audiobook.
Well, I'm assuming if your husband's like 2 or 3 times, he thought it was okay as well.
Yeah, he really liked it, and so I've heard a lot. I keep hearing snippets about the thunder.
Oh yeah, yeah. It is actually, that was the thing. I was a little taken aback that it is at the center of basketball book, but it also kind of put in perspective when the Supreme Court decision came on down about the tribal treaties in eastern Oklahoma. It sort of put that story in perspective.
The recent one, the McGirt decision?
Yes, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Congratulations on that too, by the way.
Yeah, stuff.
Let's talk about, because there's like at the very beginning of that story when, so it's Lula is, let's get this all for everybody. So Lula is the mother or the grandmother, depending on what you, if Justine is at the center of the story, then Lula is the mother, and Renee is the daughter, and then the fourth, and the story starts off with Justine wanting to, do I have this right? Wanting to go to Six Flags?
Yeah, she wants to go to Six Flags over Texas and ride a really big roller coaster. I can't remember the name of it right now, but she wants to visit her estranged father and do that.
Right.
Yeah.
And it is expecting that life will be different there. And of course, something happens to change her life, but that's not it, unfortunately. The fathers, and there are men in the book, but it's really a women's story.
It is. It's about mothers and daughters, and right.
How did it, I know, talking to a lot of writers, that you're not anybody in the book and you're everybody in the book. I already have that answer.
That's a great way to put it. Yes, I wouldn't have said that, but absolutely.
But, and were there parts of your life that you brought to the characters though?
For sure. Yeah, I mean, like some of the bones of the book you can look at and sort of make a direct, make a direct connection. But then even aside from that, just the inspiration is the people and the places I grew up in and with. And so one of the things that's a direct comparison or connection you can make is that I grew up in a household at times that had 4 generations of women, and no men, just us. And so, I come from some pretty powerful, amazing Cherokee women who are fierce and bullheaded and funny and good storytellers. And so I kind of, as maybe a kid who was a little bit quieter than them, I'm prone to listening and maybe eventually going to be prone to trying to tell my own stories. Like I remember just sitting in awe of them, my mom and her sisters, my grandmothers, and it was a very religious household. We my mom and my grandmothers and my aunts went to a holiness church similar to the one that I wrote about in the book. So I was very much pulling from experience when I was writing about this church and just sort of being surrounded by powerful women who might sometimes butt heads, but if you mess with one of them, you're going to have all of them on you immediately. Right. Like I come from this group of pretty amazing women. Do you want to see a picture?
Yes, please.
Look, this is who's watching me as I write.
Oh my God.
So this was like my grandmother, my great grandmother, my mom, and me. So,
oh my gosh,
so
that's beautiful.
Thank
Beautiful.
You. When I've gone to like fellowships or something, like I take that picture with me, and it's on my desk, and I kind of like have them with me, like encouraging me and pushing me and holding me.
The thing about the book is that the relationship, it's very much distinctively about Cherokee culture, and yet it's so universal because every woman looks at their mom
Yeah.
and has to decide, or gets decided for them, what they're gonna try to be different about, and what they're gonna, in spite of that, be the same as. I mean, I find that with both my parents, that I was like, I'm never gonna do this, and I'm never gonna do that, but crap, I got a little older, and maybe I did. But then there's still ways that I'm still very different. And that's the decision that all your characters, the struggle that your characters are going through. I mean, one of them is with the church, where in the case of Justine, she doesn't take on the faith that her mother has. But faith is such an important part for all, whether the characters are religious or not. The way Lula is in the Holiness Church, faith is very important for all the characters. Would you like to talk about that a little more?
Sure. And as you were talking, something occurred to me that I hadn't really considered, which is that, Justine was this teenager when she was rebelling against her mother, which is in the story is the same thing as rebelling against the church. And I think there's something that's sort of about that in the story, that it says that essentially, that she didn't know if she was rebelling against her mom or God himself. But if this terrible thing had not happened to her, that sort of, I think, propels the book, like it carries the arc of the book through the chapters. And I don't know, like, do we just say it? I don't.
It's on like page 20 or something.
Yeah,
of course
happens early in the book. So she's raped, and she ends up having a daughter. That's what sets in forth the motion of Justine and Rainie's lives. But if this hadn't happened to her, who knows? She might have stayed in the church, right? She didn't really have the opportunity to be just a regular teenager rebelling against her mom and her mom's church. She might have stayed there, but this really altered the course of her life. And in doing so, it leads to, as she's rebelling and just trying to be a teenager, trying to listen to some rock and roll and maybe sneak out, like just trying to experience life outside the confines of the church and her house, her church community. I lost my train of thought a little bit, but I guess what I'm thinking of is she's rejected by the church as a result of what happens to her. Right.
Before she can reject, it's her decision's made for her.
Right. Her decision is made for her. And not the entire church, but some of the church elders really kind of put pressure on her and reject her. And so as a result, she never really had the chance to fully decide that she wanted to continue in a life of a holiness person, or that she wanted to reject it. So she carries these questions of faith and belief over the course of her life, never quite sure, that she perhaps, in a very literal sense, perhaps she's going to hell for not following the beliefs that she's been raised with. So for characters like her, she carries those questions forever, despite the fact that she's no longer religious. She's deeply spiritual and deeply afraid of kind of a what if question that I think can really happen when you're raised in fundamentalism and you make your own decisions to leave that behind. But we carry who we are and how we're raised with us forever often.
Yeah. So how does your
a long time? I rambled. I don't even know if I answered you, but
yeah, you know what? It was better than an answer. It was a super answer. So hooray! How does your family, your family's still in the church? How have they reacted?
Yeah.
How have they reacted to the book?
Oh, my family members who are still in church, like my most direct family members aren't still in the Holiness Church. Okay. I certainly still have very close family members who are Christian. But some of the ones who are, I don't know, Daniel.
They're not going to read the book.
I think, I don't know, I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah. I guess I wouldn't know either. Yeah.
I'm kind of like, I'm a little nervous thinking about it. Like they may not, some probably will, we'll see.
One of them's going to show up at an event, when there are events again. And you'll be so famous and acclaimed that they'll just want to live off. They'll just want to bask in your glow, and it won't even come up.
That's probably exactly how it'll go. They're going to be in the chat like, listen. But I do hope, though, that, you know, that clearly there are some bad characters who are holiness in this book early on, but I do feel like they are just some of the people. I hope that I've handled like the religion with empathy, because I believe that, you know, like a character like Lula, the grandmother character, I mean, she found her solace in what she needed there, very much so.
Absolutely.
It wasn't for Justine, but for Lula, it saved her life, essentially, I think.
I think you do a good job of distinguishing bad people in the church from the church itself.
Yeah, I hope so, because, you know, I think that there are beautiful things when people choose to live their lives according to, like Omar, like you have to have a code, you know, like a very strict set of tenets that takes bravery, it takes courage, it takes dedication, you know, that I admire.
Yeah, that, and sometimes, you know, one of the things that's nice about being in a church is that it helps you structure that, you know, and if you have to do it on your own, it can be tougher.
Yeah, this is exhausting.
There's another important component, another icon for Lula, and that's McDonald's. And I don't know, why do I get fixated on things that nobody else cares about? I was like thinking about Lula and McDonald's versus Rini and Dairy Queen. And like, it's like the two sort of poles of connection to fast food. I'm like, she could really care less. She's working there all the time. And Lula's sort of the place where people are treated well. It's a place to go and be happy. I don't know why. And then I thought, oh, what fast food place would Justine want to go to? That's a question.
Probably Whataburger.
Yeah.
Wait, do you know Whataburgers?
You know, that's so funny. Well, yes, only from, I think I went once, because when I hear about something, like, I feel like I need to wait in line on whatever that popular thing is for a while. And then I was reading another book where I came up where somebody was obsessed with Whataburger.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so it might have come up in the Oklahoma book.
That might be me identifying with Rini, because as a teenager, that's
where you went.
That's where I went. And I've tried, like, you can't reclaim the magic. I've tried as an adult to go back, like, oh yeah, Whataburger, it's great, it's good fast food. I mean, I don't know, it's fast food. So if you have to eat fast food, try a Whataburger.
We'll all be making road trips soon enough. I hope soon enough. I wanted to talk a little back to the structure of the book. It does not, I noticed it doesn't say stories, it doesn't say novel, but it does have a structure, and you do a really great job of moving on the plot, but it does mean that you really had to decide like the order of the chapters. And there are some, there's some flexibility in that. What was that like to take these discrete things and put them together in a story that flowed? And did you get it right the first time? Did you have to move things around?
That was so hard. I mean, the book is more or less chronological. There's the story called I'll Be Listening for My Name, or Annie Mae, depending on if you have the galley or.
Oh.
Yeah, there was a change that took place last minute. Wait a minute, I had an idea. But that's it occurs chronologically, but it's someone looking back, you know, telling it, you know. So I think that might be the only thing that's not chronological, and in the telling it is. But I had a hard time. I was not sold on a chronological story for a long time, because I was thinking of how the stories talk to each other almost like a collage, as opposed to, you know, the arc of the women. And so that's something that my agent and I talked a lot about as we worked on the book, getting it ready for submission. And ultimately, it makes sense, because you hear from a multitude of voices and you have different places. And so ultimately it became clear to help orient the readers, chronological was the best way to tell the story. But I wasn't sold on it for a while. And then even when we decided chronological was the way to go, that was a challenge, knowing where to start it, you know? Yeah. And then what gaps in time are okay for readers, what gaps in time need to be sort of, like filled in a little bit. Maybe we need another story. It was quite a process to bring it from more of a collage feeling that, which is how I thought of the book for a long time, to more of a novel in stories.
Right. Was there a particular chapter, or you don't have to say the name, but like, was there a particular thing where you really had to fill in a gap sort of towards the end and realize there was something missing there? Like, what did you have to flesh out, did you feel?
Sure. There were some times between like Reenie's leaving as an adult, when Reenie leaves Texas, and the end of the book. And I liked Reenie being absent, because I feel like at that point the story, like the universe of the universe of the novel really shifts when Reenie leaves. And there's a lot of instability, because I feel like that relationship is an anchor between Justine and Reenie.
Yeah. Throughout
the book. So when Reenie leaves, things really get different and get weird in terms of how the book's put together. I think that's a reflection of what's happening for the characters once they're no longer sort of side by side, like two pieces of one heart directly, So I maintained that Reenie wasn't, we don't have a Reenie story, but we have a story where we know what's happening with her. So readers get a sense of what she's doing.
We want a little closure on this. Yeah. I don't know if you ever find this, but when I'm reading books together, I sort of see the connections. Like I'll read a book and I'll go, "That's weird. I didn't pick it," but And so one of the books, this reminded me of a little of Brian Washington's Lot.
I haven't read that, but I want to.
Well, he's got a very strong, he really captures Houston, and Houston is a place. Subcultures there. It's a Black Latino kind of blended family with an LGBT kind of coming of age story too. But what he does, similar to you, is that he has, it feels more like stories than yours, but he basically propels the plot through one family and then has almost alternating stories are sort of digressions of other people. And he had to make the decision as to whether to put all those stories together or not. And I think his decision to kind of scatter them in a way worked really well, because it made it feel like the whole thing was of a piece, even when some of those stories would be about a character that turned out to be ancillary. One story that ancillary, like not part, I'm sorry, I tended up and down, and modulation, should have taken classes. So one of the stories that I really liked that sort of felt like that to me was Then Sings My Soul, because it is really about, we don't even know who it's about until later when you connect these characters up with our main characters.
Right.
It's such a good story, but I could see somebody saying, "What's this doing in here?" Did you have to fight for that story to be a part of the book?
I didn't have to fight for it. There is a version that didn't include it. And I think that, and I think that would be, a satisfying story too. What I liked about including it is I do think that, as I said in the second half of the story, their world for both Justine and Reenie is off kilter when they don't have each other, and they're pushing at each other and fighting, and they're not in the same place anymore as they do that. Are they pushing each other and fighting? They're not really talking when Reenie leaves, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, in Hybrid Vigor, that's kind of what's happening. She's not talking to her mom. And so it made sense to me to begin to hear voices, or that's a third person story, but voices and stories that aren't directly related to the family.
I see.
To me, in that way. Another thing was, for me, I always conceived the book as a book about place, as much as family, even though we were streamlining the family story. And you know, I have a soft spot for that story, so
I could tell. I mean, that's what it goes to. So it's about just to tell everybody. So it's about two women who Steve and Marnie who move to I think they're Justine's neighbors, right? In the end.
They're not like next door neighbors. They're in the country, but they're near.
Relative.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Texas neighbors.
Country neighbors, exactly.
And they befriend Mosley,
Mm-hmm.
who helps them, and something happens with the trouble happens, I guess you would say. Bad stuff.
That big bad trouble. Let me tell you, the other thing that I really liked about that was getting like seeing Justine from a completely different perspective. Because you know, when you get her perspective from her daughter, it's so fraught with the mother-daughter relationship. When you get Justine's perspective on herself, it's also so fraught, because you know, she's carrying a heavy weight throughout her life and trying to just work her way and out of it with strength of will and body, and eventually those things begin to break down. So I liked hearing about Justine from Moses' perspective, which is like, oh, she's this really nice lady who curses a lot but gives me rides and brings me food, you know. And I liked seeing that. I liked that for Justine as a character, you know, because she doesn't get that elsewhere.
It's like when you find out that your parents have a life outside of you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
you know? Like, oh, you have friends just like me. That's weird.
Go back to your parent box, right?
You can't not talk about this book without talking about weather and the environment. You can't. It's impossible. I tried. I talked to myself for half an hour and it just kept coming up. Talk a little about that, if you may, and then we'll discuss.
About the weather?
About the weather.
Sure.
How's the weather out? How's that weather in Oklahoma and Texas?
Yeah, well, I mean, the weather is something that is extremely important to the characters' lives, and you see it like there. When does it first start? I mean, certainly in the second half of the book, you begin to see more and more instances of drought is happening, or severe storms, or wildfires brought on by droughts. So it's something that kind of begins with a low rumble and then just begins to accelerate in the second half of the book. And it's something that, again, might I don't like to sort of get too like interpretive, but it might reflect, you know, what's happening with the characters' lives and their relationships to one another. That certainly could be in there. But it's something that just grows, and eventually there becomes a question, or I don't even know if it's a question of like, oh, this may be something supernatural happening, which is, again, sort of like, you know, it's like you're improvising and then you play, I don't know, I'm not a musician, then you play an off note that stands out, you know. But I hope that sort of like, perhaps this weather is a supernatural event. It is like there's a chorus that's beginning to sing that early in the book, like that you know, when you think about like fundamentalist Christianity and characters talk about sort of like end times early in the book and things like that. So I hope that's sort of all kind of a coming together there at the end of the book, even though it's definitely it's a different kind of story. It shifts a bit.
Yeah, the last story is got an apocalyptic, fantastical feel, but you've been praised for it not feeling, and I agree, it doesn't feel like a sharp turn. You know, it feels like it's been building for the whole story, you know, the whole novel. I would think that one would also see it as like, in terms of indigenous people's connections to land, and you know, so I kept thinking about environmental, you know, the way other people have mistreated land and things like that, and I thought about the Cherokee Nation especially having to deal with the brunt of, certainly with some of the things that happen, which are clearly man-made or human-made, that they have to deal with the brunt of. So it kind of I thought about it a little, but now that you talk about the apocalyptic nature, the church things, now I'm thinking about that.
Great.
A little of everything. You brought it all together. One of the things I was going to ask you was there, you've talked a little about how there was a version of the book without a story, without one of the stories, and were there any other changes you had to make to the book? Is there a ghost a character who had a bigger role at one point? Was there some, you had to have written more stories than this, so.
Oh my goodness, yes. There is a version of the book in an alternate universe that is much.
It's 800 pages?
Yes, I mean, so there's at one point I was wondering if I could have, like, you know, a prologue, start the book like this, like, you know, I have a story where the great grandmother is in an orphanage as a child, so I've just been writing these people, and, you know, like, just writing and writing and writing, and, you know, so just figuring out where to start the story. I knew the end for a long time.
Okay.
I didn't know, I knew that we were going to finish with What Good is an Art to a Fish, where we take our sort of fantastical turn. I knew that was clear. Where to start and how to get there was the question. And so at one point I was wondering, you know, how far we go back. And then there are also stories of Justine as a younger kid. But ultimately, when I realized I think it's mostly Justine and Reni's story, it became clear that we need to start Justine's origin story, which is when she's a teenager and gets pregnant, and then the book is launched into the lives of Reni and Justine.
I was thinking as I read this book that another companion story was Valentine. Did you read Beth Wetmore's Valentine?
I have that right here to read.
Yeah, I'm sure like 7 people have given it to you. It's like, you might like this book.
No, Beth the author sent it to me. So
yeah,
she's so sweet.
She's
so
lovely.
Yes.
So,
So.
yeah. It's set in the oil bust in Texas. And it is all told through a chorus of women's voices, and also has a sexual assault at the beginning. Obviously completely different books, but you can see, let me just say that if I was a programmer at a festival, I could see having you be in conversation with her.
I would love to, and we've mentioned that, so I have catching
someday.
Up yeah.
Someday. One of the things that I wanted to mention was I was thinking about your child, and here you are writing about parents and children, and what do you want to pass on to your child, and what do you want them to change, not be like you for?
Oh my! I hope that my daughter does not worry so much about doing the wrong thing and just goes right into it and is as brash as she is now, like her whole life, you know.
Do you see yourself more as, I know, like I said, I know you're everybody, but do you see yourself more like a Reni or like a Justine?
More like a Reni. I'm not I'm not as strong as a Justine. I'm not as, you know, determined to like, you know, work my body into the ground to, you know, to try to make lives better for everyone around me. I see Justine as like, she's haunted, but I also think she's heroic.
Yeah.
You know, and that's not me.
Reni's strong too, because she is able to escape in a way that Justine never is.
Sure, that takes great strength too, for sure. But I think I would identify more with the one who's sort of like, I'm gonna get out of here for me. I love you all. You know what I mean? But I'm, you know, gonna like look out for what I need to do. I feel like I should stop talking.
All right, well then I'll ask you a couple of questions from customers. So Mary Ann has written, can you tell us a little more about that room you're in? It's very rustic and interesting. Is this where you write? And then of course, you might as well tell us your writing ritual, because everyone loves to hear that.
Sure. Yeah, so this is the office. My husband and I share it. And I've since, we have this great big long desk that my mom gave us, and it's amazing. I would show it to you, but The reason that I'm not sitting at it is because my half of it became 2 big stacks of papers. And so I just had but in the background, you can see poems. My husband is a writer as well. And poetry is one thing that he writes. And there's a cover. My daughter loves to do artwork for our books. And so there's a cover for his next book that she's designed.
Oh, nice.
Very serious that they need to be used. And if they aren't, it's...
She did a great job.
Yes, she really did. No, actually, she was quite angry when that was that cover was revealed, that it was not her contribution. But yeah, so this is just our office. It's a lot of books and a lot of hidden. I was telling Daniel earlier, it's a lot of hidden artwork that becomes piles. I'm a piler because I have a hard time getting rid of things.
Anyway, I don't know what that's like. Yeah. I don't know what that's like. We could take a tour of my stuff that I can't get rid of. I was watching a hoarding show and I was like, oh, no, I'm not as bad as that. Here's a question. Does the character development of Lula, Justine, and Rennie reflect some unique personality, cultural, historical aspects of the Cherokee women's experience? How are these women different? Do you feel like, I think what you're saying is, do you feel like the Cherokee experience is distinctive from other indigenous groups?
Oh yeah, for sure. But I don't know that the characters necessarily reflect that, you know? I mean,
it's a 2-part question, so no.
Right. Yeah, I mean, you know, yeah, I don't think it's reflective of like a Cherokee experience because, you know, we're like, we are many, you know, so there is not really one way to be, you know, Cherokee, and you know, so there are a lot of Cherokee people who are, you know, connected to more like traditional spiritual practices like going to stomp dances. There are a lot of Cherokee people who are Christians, even fundamentalist Christians. So I think it's a very particular family, and you know, there might be ways that someone who has a different grasp on this stuff than I do could look at it and write about how they might be reflective in some way. But I don't think that I can do that because I wrote the book from sort of such a deeply personal sort of experiential place, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Absolutely. Here's a question that people often ask. I'll ask it for them. What have you been reading?
What have I been reading? A book called Inheritors by Asako Sarazawa.
Oh.
It's a linked collection of short stories that came out at the same time mine did. It's really wonderful. The last book that I read and couldn't put down was Lakewood by Megan Giddings.
Love that book. Love it.
It's so good. It's so good. And then, of course, Lily King's Writers and Lovers, which is a totally different, I feel like it's really, it's heavy, but it's also just kind of like a wonderful kind of story about a writer trying to become a writer. You know, there are heavy things in it, but I felt like that was great pandemic reading. I'm having a hard time reading and writing right now during life in lockdown. I don't know if I'm too distracted by everything that's happening and I'm not creating the right space, or, you know, just sort of, it's literally hard to carve out space to read and write when you're living in a home where everyone's working from home and schooling from home and living from home. So it's been a bit of a struggle.
Could be having a 7-year-old. Could be.
I'm so tired.
I want to say a little about, so the Megan Giddings is set in rural Michigan. It's a woman from a bigger town, maybe some Ann Arbor-like place, who signs, her grandmother has died, her mother is disabled, and she has to drop out of college because there's not enough money. And she signs up for like a psychological experiment where she's asked to live in this town and have this fake job, and they're going to do a series of experiments on her. She does have to sign a waiver, like a death waiver. So that's a little disturbing. But it's sort of, she is a young Black woman, sort of in immersed in this world of almost all white people. And they basically play mind games and sometimes physical games. I mean, the book almost veers into psychological horror.
It
I would
does.
say.
It does.
Yeah, and it's a little spare in the writing, but it's very powerful. So, did I do that justice?
I think so. I think so. But that was just one that, like, I'm just having a hard time finding my place in a book and just getting into the zone. And that was one that I wanted to read it constantly. And I mean, it does veer into psychological horror. And usually I'm kind of a baby, you know. I have Stephen Graham Jones' new book sitting here.
Oh, yes.
I just got it, The Only Good Indians. I'm a little scared to read it, but I really want to because he's so great. And, but, you know, I'm kind of a baby.
I was talking your book up to one of the folks at the Electoquini Institute, which is the indigenous kind of part of UWM's programming. And we were just chatting about different authors, and I mentioned Stephen Graham Jones, our buyer, likes him too. And she was like, "Oh, I teach him." So it was very exciting. Let's see. Let's see. I might have gotten through all my questions. Environment, drought, floods, generations. I think I've done it all.
I mean, we're almost at the end. I could still read a passage, or we can wrap it up.
I think you should be like a benediction. Yes. I would love for you to read a couple of pages.
So here are just a couple of pages here that I will read from the first third of the book it's a story called, a chapter called The Year 2003 Minus 20. And I'll just start in the middle of it. This is when Renee, the youngest of the generations of women, is a little girl. The middle of the story. A good time crew from the factory drifts in and out of the house. Cigarette butts transform ashtrays into morning after volcanoes. Renee turns the ash-dusted tabletops into canvases, tracing hearts in her path when she creeps to the kitchen in the morning quiet. Men, some with union money to spare, bring occasional gifts: a bone-handled jackknife, a book of knots, the licks of a bob-tailed dog. They fill the house with noise and a sweet-smelling smoke that Renee has come to know. They leave behind safety glasses, a stray sock here or there. One leaves the Waylon and Willie record that Renee keeps stashed beneath her bed. If being with my ex taught me anything, Justine says, it's take not 1 ounce of shit from a man. Justine, who won't call Kenny by name anymore, holds her eyeliner to the flame of a match to soften it before touching it to her eyelid. Renee leans in the doorway, waiting for the familiar sermon. You can't trust a man to take care of you. Remember that, Renee. You can't trust them at all, for that matter. They'll lie to get what they want. They always want something.
The book has just gotten amazing reviews. Garner review in the Times, the San Francisco Chronicle review, I think a really great Atlantic review, a great Washington Post review, and of course the Sarah McCammon on Sunday, All Things, weekend edition. That's the morning one. Just terrific, wonderful things. I expect many, many great things to come with this book because it's the kind of book that you'll want to read again. So, which is special. So, and I can't wait till you take as long as you want. You want to take 8 years, it's okay with me. I'm not a pusher, but I am looking forward to it. Maybe I'll look out for your short stories as they get published. So, do you think that you'll do a collection of short stories? Or do you think the publisher, I know publishers don't really love like traditional short story collections, but since you have all these other stories, they may not have to wait 8 years for the novel.
Maybe not. I'm looking forward to trying a novel in which each chapter doesn't need to be its own complete movement. Yeah. And it can be, useful to a plot and hopefully lyrical and advance the plot and do just that maybe. But I don't know. I think my heart's always with short stories, so I'm sure that I will keep working on those.
Okay. Maybe we'll get both from you. That seems okay. Tell us, does your husband have a book out too?
Yeah,
Or is he working on something?
he's working on a nonfiction book called Gabriel's Echo, about a
Uh-huh.
little-known enslaved person's rebellion in Virginia. But he has a book of poems out called Home and Ghosts, which is lovely. It's on a small press, and it's very much steeped in place as well. He's from Indiana, and it's very much an Indiana book.
Oh, how cool. Maybe
Yeah,
we'll be able to put a link up for that as well.
that would be wonderful.
So let's double check to see if there's any more questions. I think we're good. We're not only good, but we're very lucky to have had this hour with you. It was really an honor. I wanted to thank you, and also thank all the folks who signed on, because we wouldn't have a bookstore without them. So hope to see you all at another event. Thank you so much, Kelli Jo Ford. We're thrilled to have this.
Thank you so much. I hope to run with you at a conference a lot one day soon.
I want to be at every conference with you, even ones on like patio furniture.
Oh, then we'll have more fun. We can just sit in the back.
Yeah, cool. All right.
Take care.
Good night.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.